Yeah, we are good to start.
Great. So thanks again, Somojit, for the generous introduction. And it's always a pleasure coming back to ISHRE and doing something, sharing knowledge. And ISHRE has always been a pioneer for that. And of course, good evening to everyone present on the call. I just hope in this challenging times you guys are safe in your respective places, confined to your home, of course, and you're taking good care of yourself. So, talking about ISHRE, actually, I just wanted to mention that my association with ISHRE Calcutta goes back a long way, something like 20 years. I was working in Calcutta then. Later on, I shifted from Calcutta, first moved to Mumbai. Now I'm based out of Gurgaon. And just wanted to thank ISHRE Kolkata for inviting me for this webinar. Technical knowledge sharing is always something which works both ways. So I would request everyone present in the call to be kind of attentive, and in case they have any opinion, I'm sure during the course of this presentation you will probably be muted, but towards the end of it, if you want to share a viewpoint, you want to share a perspective or some knowledge understanding that you have on the subject, it'll be more than welcome. There's no way I'm claiming that I know everything about centrifugal, but of course there are certain things which I wanted to put across for everyone's benefit. So just let's understand what is the scope of this webinar and how I have put up the slides. So centrifugal is a huge subject. Centrifugal chiller, when you talk about in air conditioning application, is a huge subject. And what I'll be covering the mechanical part of it. I am not covering the electrical part. I am not covering the electronics either. So we'll keep it restricted to mechanical part only, just in the interest of time. And as and when something related to electrical and electronics will come up, we'll try and address those queries also. But no slides on electrical and electronics. So let's get started, guys. So when you look at a centrifugal chiller, this is how it would typically look. Just before I get into the technical part of my presentation, I just wanted to mention, I see a few familiar names there. I'm sure I work for an organization. I'll have industry colleagues who would be working for a peer organization or competition. So, I mean, this slides that I put together is the best combination of, all the materials that were available with me. Some could be inspired by my competitor organization, or some could be inspired by some other organization. So it's a mixture of everything. Something I find better, I pick up and I put it in my slides. And this is a kind of a concoction of a lot of good slides and technical materials that I could pick up from my past organizations, my competitive organizations, and so I would request you not to be surprised if you see a familiar slide, and probably focus on the technical contents more. So quickly getting on to the centrifugal chiller operation. So basically, centrifugal chiller technology is different from any other compression technology because it is the compression technology is different. So what is different over here? We are talking about positive displacement for all other types of compressors, but here centrifugal chiller is called non-positive displacement type of compression. So here it's if you see the representation over here, or the pictorial representation on your right, you have the evaporator, or we call it cooler, from which the refrigerant is sucked. What you see on the top is the centrifugal compressor, which is necessarily compressing the refrigerant, and this is then again pumped into the condenser. So what you see on the left, the heat exchanger, is called the condenser. I am not repeating because there are of course legends there, so you can figure out for yourself what each of these components mean. I mean, we will of course explain about these things in greater details in subsequent slides. This is typically a refrigeration cycle for a centrifugal chiller. So you could probably see some animation on the right of your screen. This is the centrifugal chiller. So the cooler that I had shown you in the previous slide, it is at the bottom. So here the refrigerant is moving into the compressor and it is getting pumped in the compressor and it is being thrown into the condenser. So the blue color denotes for the cooler and the one on the top is the condenser. So it is getting thrown into the condenser, it is getting condensed, and it is again coming back to the cooler through a float valve or a orifice or a expansion valve. So on your left, what you see is a pH diagram of the representation of how a typical centrifugal chiller works, and it is same as any other refrigeration cycle or an air conditioning cycle that you see in any other compression technology. So diagrammatically, if you see the pH diagram, the line at the bottom is the evaporator, and the one which is slightly slanted, it is the compression. The one with the parallel line above the evaporator is the condensing process, and that is stay dropping onto the evaporation line is the metering device or an expansion valve or a float valve. So that is how a centrifugal chiller typically works. Now we know that there are two processes which are happening inside the centrifugal chiller, and there are two processes which are influenced by two external factors. Of course, one factor is the conditioned space. So if there is evaporation happening, that means that refrigerant is actually, it is picking up heat somewhere and it is rejecting that heat to the cooling tower. So the bottom representation that you see, the evaporation is basically the chilled water that is coming from the air conditioned space at maybe 12 degree C. It is actually that heat is being picked up in the evaporation process by the refrigerant, and then it is getting condensed, it is getting compressed, and it is going to the condenser line, and that particular heat which is picked up through evaporation process is getting rejected in the cooling tower. So you have cooling tower which is sending water at 85 degree, and that 85 degree water is getting heated up to 95 degree. It is going back to the cooling tower. So it's a simple philosophy. You are picking up heat from the condensing from the air conditioned space, and you are rejecting that heat into the atmosphere. Now in that particular slide, I would like to actually coin a very specific term which is related to centrifugal chiller, and I'll try and explain why it is different. Now in all other compression technology, be it a reciprocating or a scroll or a screw or a rotary, you see positive displacement. That means that refrigerant is getting compressed by linear compression. There's a volumetric compression that is happening. It's a physical compression of refrigerant. So gaseous refrigerant is getting compressed. Now, how it is different in centrifugal chiller? In centrifugal chiller, there's no physical compression. So what is exactly happening here is that you have an impeller. We will talk about impeller. You have an impeller in the compressor which is rotating at very high RPM. So impeller is like a disc, and there are a lot of contours in the impeller which traps the refrigerant, and it is rotating RPM, something like in excess of 10,000 RPM for a single stage. Because of this rotation, there is tangential velocity which is imparted onto the refrigerant. So here, a kinetic energy is getting converted to a pressure energy. So what you generally achieve in normal positive displacement type of compression, you are achieving by converting, in the case of centrifugal chiller, converting kinetic energy into pressure energy. Now the term that I mentioned in this slide is called the lift. So lift is the amount of work done by a centrifugal compressor. So when you talk about lift or head pressure, it is the work done by the compressor. That means the pressure that is being imparted by the impeller onto the refrigerant for it to go from a low pressure refrigerant to a high pressure situation. So what you are doing over here, you are actually changing the pressure of the refrigerant because you are imparting tangential velocity and changing the converting the kinetic energy into pressure energy. So lift, if you see on your left, is denoted in red. That means the compression process, the entire compression process is nothing else. It is a process by which you actually you convert the low pressure refrigerant into a high pressure refrigerant. And that is done by imparting tangential velocity on the refrigerant. So moving on, at this point in time, I'll introduce another important law which actually centrifugal chiller follows, or rather centrifugal compressor follows, because if a phenomena like this is happening in a centrifugal compressor where a pressure kinetic energy is getting converted to pressure energy, then it has to follow certain laws. And those laws, I think we are already familiar with. Those laws are called fan laws. So we can probably skip the first two, and I'll just talk about the third one little bit in depth, because this has got a lot of relevance when it comes to the power consumption of the centrifugal chiller and the associated saving that is uh, that we see in centrifugal chillers. So when it comes to centrifugal chiller, it follows the third fan law, which is that the power is proportional to the speed cube. That means what it translates to, that if you are able to vary the speed of the compressor, the speed of the impeller at which it is rotating, the power actually gets reduced exponentially. That means it gets reduced by cube root of that speed reduction. So any small reduction in speed actually results in exponential reduction in power. So, and that is why this rule is very important. And we see how this particular rule is being used to derive the maximum out of centrifugal chiller, how you can probably alter the speed of the compressor and thereby reduce the power consumption of the overall centrifugal chiller. So this is how it would look like, a centrifugal chiller. Just to kind of give you a description of the parts, if you see, you have the centrifugal chiller, you may have a hermetic motor or a semi-hermetic motor with the compressor. You have an IGV active actuator, which I'll talk in subsequent slide. You have a suction elbow through which the refrigerant is being sucked into the compressor. You have a power panel. You have an oil pump. Now, oil pump is the most critical component in a centrifugal chiller, because oil pump actually pumps oil into the bearing and lubricates the bearing. And as we know, the centrifugal chiller operates at a very high RPM. It is very, very important that we have centrifugal chillers properly, the bearings properly lubricated. It is being maintained at certain viscosity. You have at the bottom the charging valve. Generally, if you have to do any side charging, you have to do this. This is the front view, and with that, I would also show the back view or the rear view of the centrifugal, where you have a starter mounted, you have relief valves. You in the semi-hermetic type of motor, you have a specific line which is called the motor cooling line, which you see on the right top. And of course, there's a float valve. You already had spoken about float valve. Float valve is nothing else, but it is actually an expansion device which is being used for centrifugal chiller. Component wise, further expanding on this thing, this is for us to understand that how the different components look like. And one of the most important component is obviously the compressor, because centrifugal chiller is unique because of the compression technology that it deploys. And that is why it is important for us to understand how the compressor would look like. So this is typically a cut section of a centrifugal compressor. So what you see, if you just look at on the left of your screen, there are different parts which are being described over here. But just for benefit of all, I'll just quickly explain that. So what you see in the blue, the part one is basically, this is called the rotor. So this is the motor. It could be an open type motor. It could be a semi-hermetic motor, but this is the motor which actually induces that flux into the shaft, and because of that, the shaft rotates. Of course, the part number 2 is the main journal bearing on which the shaft rests. Associated with that, the component 3 or the part 3 is basically the low speed gear. So this is a gear. Part 3 is the gear, which is called a low speed gear. If you look at this, very adjacent to that, there's a component which is component number 4, and that is the high speed gear. Now, high speed gear is something on which the impeller is being mounted. So as we know that, if you change the gear ratio and, you have transmission through gear, the low speed gear could be rotating at 2950 RPM because it's a 2-pole motor, but you have a high speed gear associated with it. The 2950 RPM can become anything between 8,000, 10,000, 12,000, 14,000 RPM, depending on the gear ratio. Now, on that gear, the extended shaft that you see, which is basically in fact, the component 6 is the thrust bearing on which the particular shaft rests, which actually holds the impeller. So component 8 is basically the impeller, and you can probably have a look at the impeller, the way it looks basically. This is what is responsible for imparting the tangential velocity on the refrigerant, and this throws the refrigerant into the volute. So if you see on top of it, there are other components. Of course, there's a shroud through which refrigerant flows into the compressor or the impeller. Number 10 component is the diffuser, through which the refrigerant is diffused and it is streamlined. You have the inlet guide vane, which is component 11, through which the refrigerant flows into the compressor. The inlet guide vane has a great role to play over here because in the absence of a VFD, it actually modulates the capacity of the centrifugal compressor. So how much refrigerant to be allowed inside the compressor is being decided by inlet guide vane position. So it basically either opens or closes to allow or disallow the flow of refrigerant inside it. And then on the bottom, I mentioned that oil pump and oil filter are extremely critical. Oil pump pumps the refrigerant and ensure that all the bearings are lubricated, and there is no friction loss over there. It maintains the viscosity. Oil filter and there is an oil heater also, which is probably not shown here. There's an oil heater also, which also ensures that the oil is maintained at certain viscosity, which is required for smooth functioning of a centrifugal compressor. So now we already discussed about lift or head pressure, and we know how critical it is because a centrifugal is defined by its ability to generate lift or head. Now, why it is important? Because if it is not able to generate that lift and not able to throw the refrigerant from the evaporator to the condenser, then refrigerant will flow back. So lift is a very, very critical characteristics when it comes to centrifugal chiller. And it is important that the lift is monitored, lift is modulated, lift is probably, it is in sync with the lift requirement that is required. So your compressor should be responsive enough in case there is a lift reduction happening because of maybe lowering of wet bulb temperature outside. The outside wet bulb temperature has come down, your condenser water has come down, and your lift requirement has ideally also come down. In that situation, your centrifugal chiller should be able to respond well. So if you work in that way, then only you can derive the maximum efficiency out of a centrifugal chiller. Even if your lift has reduced, for a typical fixed speed centrifugal chiller, it might have a tendency to work in full throttle, or it might just restrict the flow of the refrigerant by closing the inlet guide vane. Compressor still works at full throttle. Impeller still rotates at highest RPM possible. So that is necessarily an efficiency loss. And we don't want that to happen in case of a centrifugal chiller, because at the end of the day, we are talking about energy efficiency and power saving in our chiller. So this is how it is. If you see from the previous slides, what I was trying to explain is that in case there's lowering condenser water temperature, the lift requirement has come down, and your chiller, your compressor should be able to reciprocate with that. Now here I would like to give you a nice analogy by which you will be able to understand what I'm trying to explain over here. So imagine somebody is trying to throw a large rock on a mountain top. Okay, so the work done by the person is the work required to throw that particular rock onto the mountain top. So load is the weight of the rock, lift is the height of the mountain. So that means, in centrifugal terminology, amount of refrigerant is something which is the load, and the pressure that it has to elevate the refrigerant to is the lift. So this is the energy required. And for centrifugal, this is the generated lift. So a centrifugal compressor has to be designed for its peak capacity to handle a mass of refrigerant to be elevated from a certain pressure level to a higher pressure level. So that is called the design lift. Now, what is that higher pressure level? Lift is nothing else. It is the difference between the condensing temperature and the evaporating temperature. So a centrifugal chiller should be designed in a way of course, for different site could be different, but it has to work in particular evaporating temperature and condensing temperature. These two temperatures could be different depending on the installation location. So Calcutta, the lift requirement could be different versus the requirement in Delhi or Bangalore. But every centrifugal is subjected to this lift requirement, and it works for generation of that particular lift. So here, I mean, it's a typical example. It's 85 degree Fahrenheit is the condenser entering temperature, and 44 degree Fahrenheit is the evaporating temperature. Where what we are talking here is the difference between the condensing temperature and the evaporating temperature, which is the lift. Now, what we need to understand here that we are talking about constant entering condenser water, and what is more important here is to understand that in case of an air conditioning system or a typical chiller plant room, there are two part load factors that come into play. One is your air conditioning load requirement. So let's say you design this for a 10-story building, and maybe at some point in time 5 stories are not working, so you are only left with half of your air conditioning load that you had estimated it for, or let's say 60% or 70%. That's a load reduction. That is called an internal load reduction. Now, what is an external load? That also you need to understand. The external load is something which has got to do with the wet bulb temperature. So that means there's a wet bulb temperature reduction happening on centrifugal on the actual site condition, then that is also a reduction, a load reduction for the centrifugal chiller. Now, centrifugal efficiency can be improved only when there is an external load reduction. That means centrifugal chiller is subjected to lower load. Any load Somujit, some background noise. Can you intervene? Yeah, so we are good. So any load reduction, any internal load reduction does not translate into power saving for the centrifugal chiller if the external load reduction is not happening. That means in case you have a situation where internal load has come down, but wet bulb temperature is maintaining at design temperature, the power consumption does not necessarily, the specific power consumption does not necessarily come down. In terms of absolute power, it might come down, but specific power consumption doesn't come down. So You have to be able to find out a mechanism by which, when there is a reduction of condensate temperature, your chiller is able to reciprocate to that. Okay, so that means that your chiller should be able to generate only that much lift what is required at that particular point. So this is called the off design lift, which you see in the slide. So there's, you had designed it for 85 degree, it has come down to, of course here it is being shown as 55, but 85 can become 80, can become 75, and can become 70 degree Fahrenheit condenser water entering temperature. The question is whether your chiller is capable of handling that lift at that particular point in time and exactly reciprocate or kind of mirror the lift that is required in terms of the delivery that is being given by the centrifugal chiller. Now it is important that in constant condenser situation, when in the there's no relief on the condenser side, that means there's no reduction on the wet bulb side, the centrifugal chiller power saving is not there, or it is absolutely minimum when you talk about the specific power consumption. Now it is able to generate that lift for a lower off design case, in case by closing the inlet guide vanes of the centrifugal chiller, but there is other mechanism by which this can also be done, and here I would like to introduce that particular concept, which is called the variable speed drive. Of course we are not covering the variable speed drive over here, but just for our interest, we need to know what is a variable speed drive. So you can reduce, as I mentioned, that it is, when it comes to lift, it is about handling a particular mass of refrigerant for and generate a certain lift or certain elevation of certain pressure. Now when the lift requirement has come down, you can do it by two ways. One is by you reduce the flow of the refrigerant. That means that you are basically you're reducing the mass flow rate and you're reducing the refrigerant effect, and you're delivering a lift, but necessarily you are still throwing the refrigerant with the same lift requirement. So this is a kind of a forced reduction of the capacity at which your centrifugal chiller is operating. As opposed to that, when you look at the variable speed drive operation, what you are exactly doing is that you are reducing the speed of the compressor or the impeller, by which you are exactly delivering the lift that is required at that particular operating point. So that means in terms of this pictorial, you see the lift, the initial lift or the design lift is represented by the black line, where you're throwing the rock on the mountain top. Now we have to throw that particular rock only midway, so you are reducing the speed of the compressor. And if I may just relate this particular concept to the earlier slide and the fan laws that I've shown, if you reduce the compressor speed, the power reduction is cube root. That means you'll have a lot of power saving in that. So you're basically matching the particular lift to your requirement, and thereby you're saving power on this. Because so this is a graphical representation of how it will look like, in terms of the numbers. So I'm showing this by means of a graph. The red one is basically representing a constant centrifugal chiller operation with constant condenser water entering temperature. So it is, if you see from 100%, different part loads are being shown. What you see on the y-axis is the IKW per ton. What you see in the x-axis is the different part loads. So 100, 80, 70. What will be the consumption of that chiller that is being represented over here? Here you see a blue line, which is constant speed central chiller with ARI leaf on condenser water entering. So basically, as I said, here the reduction of specific power consumption is very minimal. So at 100% load, both are at same level. And as you go into the part loads, there is reduction happening because you have a favorable condenser water entering temperature, which is at at a lower level than your design temperature. But the reduction is not something which is mm, exponential. It is not something which is very high. Reduction is marginal. It's minimal. Now here you see, by introducing a VFD on a centrifugal chiller, how you are able to reduce the energy consumption. So the green line that you see at the bottom is basically the VFD centrifugal representation. So as you go into the part loads, your part load consumption comes down to as low as 0.3. So if you see the gap that is present over here, if I may just put a laser pointer over here. So if you see, this is the gap. So this is the gap in energy consumption in different loads. So at 50% level, it is coming down to something like 0.3, and then it is of course increasing. So 50 to 40% band is the best band for centrifugal chiller when it's downloading on VFD with a condenser water relief. So the point I want to drive over here is that you have three scenarios in which a constant speed centri with constant temperature, which is being represented by this red line. This blue line represents a constant speed centrifugal with ARI relief on condenser water entering temperature. So this is the blue line, and the green line is the VFD centrifugal representation. And you see the gap, which are really, really wide. And I again would go back to the fan laws that I have showed in few slides earlier, is that when you look at the reduction, the speed is actually the power consumption is actually proportional to speed cube, or the power is the speed is proportional to the cube root of the power. So small reduction of the speed, which you are doing in this green line case by means of VSD, you are getting tremendous saving on the chiller power consumption. So enough of theory. I would like to discuss about two very unique thing about centrifugal chiller, and which is responsible for all this lift and speed reduction, compression, and everything. And these two things are the impeller diameter and the gear ratio. Of course, impeller we have not covered in great details. We'll be doing in subsequent slides. So impeller is, you have already seen the compressor cut section. It's a disc-like object with contours in between which traps the refrigerant. So here, this is the representation of the impeller. So this is the tip speed of the impeller. So it is important for you to understand why impeller is important. Now, if you increase the diameter of the impeller, the tip speed will increase. That means it will be able to impart more tangential velocity onto the refrigerant. That means it will be able to generate more lift. So in case you are designing for let's say location of Calcutta, where the condenser water entering temperature is much higher as compared to Delhi or Bangalore, you will probably give a higher diameter impeller so that it is able to generate more lift. But it also has got a downside, and the downside is when you design a compressor with a higher sized impeller, the power consumption in favorable condenser water in temperature actually become worse, because if centrifugal chiller were to operate across wide variation of condenser water in temperature and load variation, it cannot be efficient at all load points. So impeller dia is important because you are designing it for certain lift. You need to decide what should be the impeller dia. Please remember, higher the impeller dia, some formulas are being given. So the tip speed, which is being denoted, should be around 670 to 700 feet per second. The point to remember here is the higher the impeller dia, higher the lift, but it is also inefficient in favorable conditions. The other important factor over here is the gear ratio. So why it is important? Now, there are different manufacturers present. Manufacturers have different methodology by which the speed reduction happens. So some play with the gear ratio, some play with the impeller, some play with both. So you have a combination of these three by which you design your centrifugal compressor so that you are able to deliver the lift that is required for that particular design site. Now, why gear ratio is important? Because you have to decide on the speed of the impeller as well. So it's a very simple thing. You have a particular size impeller which you can't change, and you want on an increased lift. So what you necessarily do is you actually rotate the impeller at a higher speed, and thereby you generate the lift. If you have the flexibility of changing the impeller dia, you you make it higher to generate more lift. Of course, you can't do it in a live compressor, because once you have chosen the hardware, it remains fixed and it doesn't change. So another option for changing the impeller speed is, of course, the gear ratio. So what you do is you want your system to be designed for a higher speed. You make the gear ratio higher, so that your high speed gear rotates at a higher RPM, imparting higher RPM to the impeller and generating higher tip speed. You want to design it for maybe lower tip speed, so you change the gear ratio and you reduce the gear ratio basically. So what you see over here is called the assembly, the gear assembly, or the Dynaglide assembly. When this particular thing denotes the low speed gear. This is the shaft which is mounted on the motor, and this is the low speed gear. So this is another shaft which is mounted on the impeller. So these are the two important components we need to understand, by which we can actually design the compressor or design the centrifugal chiller to deliver us the required lift. So I'll quickly move on. Just wanted to check how much time. So I don't want this to be a very elongated presentation. So just quickly move on this, and then if you have any query, maybe towards the end of it we can take it. So like you have for pump curve, you have for centrifugal chiller also a curve, and it is denoted by two important parameters, and we already have discussed about them. One that you see on the y-axis is the head factor or the lift, and on your right what you see is the flow factor, that is the mass flow of the refrigerant that is happening. And this is represented by this blue line. So the blue line that you see is basically called the surge line or the Stonewall line. That means any operating parameter which is falling inside this line, centrifugal chiller will operate. Anything which is above this line, centrifugal chiller will not operate. So this is called the operating envelope as well. That means the centrifugal chiller will only operate below this line. Here, a good, well-designed centrifugal chiller, the 100% is being presented over here, which is it is within so that it is within the goal of the operator, slightly away from the surge, fluctuation of the condenser, water entering temperature, or let's say leaving chill water temperature going down. If the lift requirement is slightly higher, it is able to do that. Surge line, and it will not be able to operate further. This is a typical representation of a fixed diffuser centrifugal compressor. Now, what happens if you change the diffuser mechanism a little bit? Again, I am covering the technical part. We'll come to the animation part a little later, so you understand what components are what. So when the centrifugal chiller actually rotates, you have the diffuser after the tangential velocity being imparted on the refrigerant, it goes through the diffuser. So these are called the pipe diffusers. So what you see over here, this is just an expanded view. This is the pipe diffuser through which the refrigerant is flowing. So through this, the refrigerant flows in a streamlined manner. It gets into the volute and then gets pumped into the this is basically the compressor out. So basically it goes into the condenser. So this is called the pipe diffuser. Now, we have discussed over here the limitation of centrifugal chiller, that it has a tendency at lower load to surge. Now, to address that problem, there's a specific technology which is being adopted by certain manufacturers, and almost most of them have adopted this. They deploy a technology which is called a variable geometry diffuser. That means that whenever the operating point of the centrifugal chiller is near the surge line and there is a tendency of it is touching the surge line and compressor getting stalled, the pipe diffuser is basically pinched. That means through which the refrigerant is flowing, that particular diffuser is pinched. The diameter of the diffuser is made smaller, and this is what you have a diffuser ring which actually oscillates and basically makes the particular thing smaller, the diameter of the diffuser smaller, by which you are able to generate more pressure onto the refrigerant, or impart more pressure into the refrigerant. I will explain this by a small analogy. When you are in the garden and you are watering the plants with a hose, and you see some of the water flow is not right. So if you pinch the tube, the water will have a tendency to go further ahead, because you have now pinched the tip of the water hose. So this phenomenon is same as this. This is just being adapted, or this is just kept as an option in centrifugal chiller, so that at low load condition it doesn't surge, and it is able to generate in case of high lift requirement, is able to generate that high lift, because it will prevent the centrifugal chiller from getting stalled. So with this centrifugal chiller, surge line actually shifts up. So what happens is, the centrifugal chiller, which was earlier maybe stalling at probably at 35%, will further unload, because you have shifted the stone wall over here. But it is also important to understand that this is an inefficient process, and as you pinch the particular diffuser and you increase the lift, impart an additional thrust of lift on the refrigerant, the efficiency also of the centrifugal chiller also kind of deteriorates. So this is about the piped variable geometry diffuser, and different people call it differently. Some people call it split ring diffuser, some call it variable geometry diffuser, some call it adjustable diffuser. I will talk about the inlet guide vane. Of course, we have discussed about inlet guide vane, so I'll just quickly take you through. So inlet guide vane is a component which looks something like this. It is responsible for allowing the refrigerant to flow into the compressor. So this part that you see is responsible for allowing the refrigerant into the compressor, and it can open and it can close. And if you see, these are the ropes that are there, which is of course coupled with an actuator motor, which gets actuated, pulls the rope, and these ropes are tied with these lobes that you see in the inlet guide vane. It opens and closes. So this is typically an open position, and this is partially open and this is partially closed. So here the refrigerant flow will be restricted. Here the refrigerant flow is almost towards 100%. Here the refrigerant flow would be let's say 50% or 60% or even less, maybe 40%. So this is how inlet guide vane would allow refrigerant or disallow refrigerant depending on the capacity requirement that you have. This is the impeller wheel that is there, and this is the pipe diffuser shrouded impeller. Now, shroud is something which is another important component of centrifugal chiller, which is responsible for the capacity that centrifugal chiller is delivering. It could be a shrouded impeller, it could be an unshrouded impeller. So in case of a shrouded impeller, the shroud and impeller is one ensemble. In case of an unshrouded impeller, they are two different components, but they are coupled together to make the whole ensemble. So that's how these two types of impellers are different. As I said, different manufacturers have different type of impellers. There's nothing good or bad about different types of impellers, as long as it is able to deliver the capacity and the lift requirement that is required for the system. We'll talk about motors, different type of motors. One of the very popular motors that is promoted by one of the manufacturers, open type motors. And I will not get into the depth of it, but just for understanding, there are 4 types of motors I wanted to speak about. One is, of course, open type drip proof motor, which is called ODP type. This is called TFC type, which is totally enclosed fan cooled motor. The third one that I want to talk about is EVAC type, which is totally enclosed water cooled motor. And these I'm talking about all the compressor motors. So compressor motor is something which is driving the compressor, so it is important. These are different types of motors. And the fourth one I want to talk about is the TERC motor, which is totally enclosed refrigerant cooled motor. They are different types of motors. Their working philosophy is different. And this is not the right forum to discuss which one is better, which one is not so good. But just for understanding, TVAC and TERC type of motor has better protection class, which is not present with open drip proof motor. Totally enclosed fan cooled motor is slightly better version of ODP type motor, and always preferred. But you know, these types have their own advantages and disadvantages. So I mean, we can talk about them separately in separate forum, but then these are the different types of motors that are available for the compressor. So I will just quickly move into the animation part so that you're able to understand how it functions. We discussed about a lot of things. We discussed about compressors, we discussed about impeller, we discussed about shroud, we discussed about inlet guide vent, and now you will see all of them play over here. So this is where the evaporation is happening, and this is the suction elbow through which it is getting into the compressor, and it is getting compressed. So this is the impeller rotating. You can see there is a rotating part here. The impeller is rotating. It is going into the volute, and then it is coming into the condenser. From the condenser, you have this small part here, which is of course the float valve through which again it is going to the evaporator. So that's how the cycle is operating. You have the condenser cooling water, this line, this red line, and this is the chill water line, which is coming from the air conditioned space and then again going back after the heat is being released into the chiller. I will quickly give you some idea about how different components work. We spoke about oil pump and oil circulation, how critical they are. So I'll just first talk about the oil circulation. So this is the oil pump, and this is how the circulation will look like. So this is basically, the oil is being pumped into the bearing, so the bearing stays lubricated, and the compressor is able to operate at higher RPM. This is the oil return circuit. So you're throwing into the oil into the compressor. There has to be a mechanism by which the oil is being returned into the oil pump, because you know that any oil that is present into the system, it actually is a deterrent for heat transfer. So heat transfer will not work efficiently. And there is a reason. This is the oil return line. There's an oil cooling circuit which is also important, because as I mentioned earlier, oil has to maintain at certain viscosity, and there could be times when you need to heat it up. So there is a heater also present there, or there could be a time when just to maintain the right viscosity, you might have to cool it down. So there is a separate line which is being given, and if you see a small heat exchanger being present over here, which regulates the oil temperature in a way so that it is suitable for lubrication. And this is the liquid refrigeration injection circuit. So this is very important for you to understand. We spoke about TERC type of motors, which is totally enclosed refrigerant cooled. Now this particular motor, the cooling phenomena is that it is cooled by the refrigerant. So you have a small tapping which comes from the condenser, and then it goes over here. There's a small orifice which is put, and this refrigerant is being thrown into the motor. Inside the motor, as you know, it's a semi-hermetic motor. It's sealed. There's a pipe connection through which refrigerant is impinged on the motor. This state of the refrigerant is of course liquid, low temperature. So it basically picks up the heat from the motor, and it comes back. If you see, it comes back to the circuit. So there's a small tapping which is being taken in case of a TERC motor to cool the motor windings. which is generating heat, which in case of a TFC motor or an ODP type of motor is cooled by an external fan, and it is cooled by air, which then fan sucks the air and it cools the motor, and the motor is the air is being thrown into the plant. So I'll just quickly move on to the next slide. Looks like there's a problem with this. Yeah. So here I think this is a very unique slide which will talk about different. So this is the compressor. This is the oil cooler. This is the oil pressure sensor. This is the PLC controller. This is the heat exchanger. Of course, in this case, it is evaporator. So I'll just quickly close all of them, and let's look at the compressor. So this is how the compressor is. This is how a semi-hermetic motor will look like. So this is the line which I just spoke about in the previous slide, which cools the motor. This is the balancing pipe. This is the compressor oil level side glass. This is how it is. And I think I'm not able to see the other one. Just a sec. So this is the compressor cut view. So we have already discussed about that. I'll not spend much time, but there's a specific thing I want to show over here, and you can see the components. I've already covered those components. This is the oil heater that I spoke about. Now I make the simulator active. So let me just quickly close this. Okay, so you see this is the stator part of it. This is the this is the stator, this is the motor, and this is the shaft which is extending onto the low speed gear, and then you have the high speed gear. Then this is the shaft, this is the impeller. Now you can see the impeller rotating. So what is happening is the refrigerant is flowing from this place. It is this tangential velocity is imparted on that, and then from this, so this is the adjustable diffuser that I spoke about. This is the space or the diffuser through which it is getting into the volute, and then it is getting thrown into the condenser. So this is the simulator active model. I'll just have to navigate through the slides. Okay, so these are the components that I spoke about. So you have a volute, which is of course the casing of the compressor, eventual casing of this is the volute. You have the diffuser, and I already explained what diffuser is. This is the impeller, this is the shroud, and this is the inlet guide. Now, if you get further into further depth, this is how it will typically operate. So this is how it will look like. See the vane, how they're rotating and closing. So this is how it will. I'll just make the video play one more time for you to understand. This is the impeller rotating. This is impeller through the diffuser it is going. This is now once it goes to the diffuser, it coming out from the volute. This is the shroud which decides the capacity, and this is the inlet. See this inlet guide. Now I will talk about one important aspect. I spoke about a lot of things. We spoke about centrifugal force. We spoke about high surge. We spoke about lift. We spoke about tangential velocity. So centrifugal force would typically look like this. So refrigerant is flowing through the middle, and the tangential velocity is being imparted onto it, and it is coming out from the top. It's very simple. Now, what is high head surge? High head surge is something where your condenser is sitting at a higher pressure than the pressure that is being generated by the impeller or the centrifugal chamber. Just wanted to ensure that I'm not the alone speaking, and everyone is present on the call. Sometimes you get disconnected.
Yeah, you continue.
So just moving on.
We are mesmerized.
So this is the high head surge Okay, so high head surge is nothing else. It is your condenser is sitting at a higher pressure. Your compressor is not able to overcome the pressure of that condenser, and there is a flow back of refrigerant is happening. So what you're necessarily doing is the impeller is rotating. It is trying to lift the refrigerant, but it is flowing back because the condenser is sitting at a higher pressure. And this is what is being denoted over here. Now, low load surge or incipient surge is something which is a different type of phenomenon. And as I said, that no impeller is having these cavities, and these cavities are getting filled with refrigerant. Now, if the refrigerant flow is less, which necessarily happens in case of a low load, you are pumping less refrigerant, these cavities don't get filled enough. So no matter at what speed the refrigerant, the impeller is rotating, refrigerant is never able to travel to the condenser. So this is called an incipient surge. This phenomenon is called incipient surge. And refrigerant is actually flowing back into the compressor again, which is again resulting in stalling of the compressor. Now, at any given point in time, the compressor is trying to pump the refrigerant, and refrigerant is flowing back, and it's trying to stall the compressor. That phenomenon is called surge. And surge is detrimental for centrifugal chiller. You don't want surge to happen because there could be anything that could be happening on the compressor. You know, your compressor motor might burn out. There could be a complete explosion that might happen on the inside in your compressor, and your impeller might get broken into pieces. You don't want that to happen. Now, this is something which will explain this. This is the normal working that is happening. So you see, this is the inlet guide vent through which refrigerant is flowing. This is the impeller rotating over here, and it is throwing into the volute. Now, in case of surge, it is trying to throw, but this is higher pressure, so refrigerant is flowing back. So you see how it is flowing back. The moment this happens, there is an efficiency reduction that is happening. There's a huge noise that might happen because your compressor is subjected to some kind of pressure. There could be an abnormal vibration that could happen, and there could be a current impulse. So current consumption might shoot up. Now, what is the solution of anti-surge? How do you ensure that your compressor doesn't surge and doesn't stall? So the way you can possibly do is by means of a variable frequency dive and inlet guide vent modulation. And the other important factor over here is the anti-surge device. So here I would like to talk about one particular specific component which is very popular in our industry, and so different people have different opinion about that. But what we need to understand is that it is more of a protection device to your centrifugal compressor, which is an expensive one, and you need to provide that to ensure that you're under no circumstances the machine gets into a stall mode or a surge mode, because that can actually damage your compressor permanently. And that particular component is called hot gas bypass. We have different terminologies existing in the market. Some call it hot gas bypass, some call it envelope stability control, some call it anti-surge device. Now, what necessarily it is that it basically, in simple term, it releases the pressure of the compressor. So here you have the compressor which is trying to send the refrigerant, pump the refrigerant into the condenser. Because of the higher pressure buildup in the condenser, it is not able to flow into that condenser. There is a small line which is being given with a valve. Sorry. This is a valve which is given, which is called a hot gas bypass valve or a control valve, by which the pressure, when there is a pressure buildup over here and it is not able to overcome the condenser pressure, this valve opens and this releases this hot gas into the entry line or the suction line of the evaporator. So compressor doesn't stall, hot gas is bypassed, the pressure is relieved, the pressure is balanced. But what necessarily happens, because this is an inefficient process, you compromise on your centrifugal chiller efficiency. So whenever there's a hot gas control valve opening, of course you are able to save your compressor, but you compromise on your energy efficiency. Because of hot gas valve opening and hot gas getting bypassed into the evaporator, the temperature shoots up. The temperature shoots up, and evaporator evaporation process becomes inefficient, and your power consumption actually shoots up. But this is important, and with an intelligent use of hot gas bypass, a proper use of hot gas bypass, we can actually prevent a lot of catastrophic failure on centrifugal chiller. And I think we strongly recommend that this should be a part of the system. When it is kicking in, whether your centrifugal chiller is properly designed to handle the requisite lift or something, which is again dependent on the manufacturer or the person who is designing or selecting the centrifugal compressor. As long as that part is being taken care of, I think hot gas bypass can be present on the system as a safety device. So I'll just quickly move on and talk about two-stage compression of centrifugal chiller. This will be, I think, probably the second to last slide. So we can be a little relaxed because I don't think we have taken much time to cover this slides.
You have enough time, Deepankar. You can please take your time.
Yeah, so we'll quickly finish this up and then open it for Q&A so that we can cover any queries that this forum may have.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Okay, so what? Yeah, thanks. So what is two-stage centrifugal chiller? So two-stage centrifugal chiller is that you are actually deploying two impellers in your compressor. So that means you are compressing the refrigerant in two stages. So on this particular picture that you see, this is the impeller 1 and this is the impeller 2. So everything else remains the same. You are actually distributing the compression process into two stages. And why are you doing that? Because if you have two impellers, you are able to generate more lift and you are able to generate the lift requirement much more efficiently. And it is important that we understand that when you have two-stage compression, this can generate higher lift. This process can be much more efficient, probably as compared to maybe a single-stage compression, especially in case of part load condition. The unloading ability of that particular two-stage compression, is better as compared to single-stage compression. I already touched upon the part load efficiency, which also becomes better, and the whole efficiency level goes up one notch because you are compressing in two stages and you are also bringing in another important component, which is the economizer. So one here at the bottom, what you see, this is I'll just make it, sorry. So this, what you see over here is the economizer. So economizer, the function is very simple. You have the condenser, and from the condenser, the refrigerant is flowing into the evaporator, and you have an expansion valve in between. So what you are doing is you are putting two expansion valves over here, and in between two expansion valves, you are actually putting a flash tank, or which is called economizer. So it is getting expanded. The refrigerant is flowing into it. The flash tank actually traps all the gaseous refrigerant that is being carried over from the condenser, and only the liquid refrigerant is allowed to pass through this particular orifice before going into the cooler. And this particular gas, after it is getting trapped over here, it is sent into the compressor. So you have an output from the first compressor. I will pictorially, I will take the bottom picture. It will help you understand. So this is the refrigerant, the gaseous refrigerant which is getting trapped into the flash tank is coming over here. This is the input to the first impeller. This is the output to the output of the first impeller getting into the second impeller. This is getting mixed with the flash tank trapped gaseous refrigerant, and this two are getting mixed and getting compressed into the second stage impeller, and it is getting then thrown into the volute. How does it impact in terms of the efficiency? I think we'll have to look at the pH diagram, which is on the right. I'm sorry if it is getting a little more technical, but still I would like to go ahead with this explanation. So it is basically, if you see, there are threefold advantages that you have. One is that the polytropic head reduction that happens for the second stage compression. So that means that when these two refrigerants are getting mixed, the temperature comes down, and when the temperature comes down, the ability of the second compressor or the second impeller to generate that lift increases. So this 2 to 3 point is nothing else. If you see there is an enthalpy change happening, it is because your first impeller output is at a higher temperature. This flash tank output is at a lower temperature. The mixture is shifting from 2 to 3. There's an enthalpy change happening. And then it is getting lifted. So it is, the superheat is much more balanced. And you know that, if the superheat is too high, it makes the whole refrigeration cycle inefficient. So here from 3 to 4, the superheat is much more balanced. It is getting into the condenser, and then from the condenser it is dropping into it is going through the first orifice. So this process is this orifice. It is getting into the flash tank, and because you are eliminating the vapor over here, and through the second orifice what is passing through is only liquid, or I would say 99.9% liquid, your evaporator or the cooler operates at a higher efficiency. So here also, if you see, the one is that you are handling the superheat in a better way, and the second thing is you are also handling the subcooling in a way that it is shifting from 6 to 7, because there is no impurities present, there is no gas present that is getting into the refrigerant that is getting into the cooler. It is only in purest form of liquid. So the superheat, the subcooling is also better, and it is dropping further left onto the evaporation line. That means that your evaporation process is also better. So if you see the cycle efficiency of a two-stage compression, it is considered to be better than a single-stage compression, because you are bringing in the dynamics of one, two-stage compression, and second, you are bringing in the dynamics of an economizer, just to make the refrigeration cycle much more efficient. Okay, so technical part is over. I think in India context, we need to understand one important concept, which is K adjustment factor. I will not get into the depth of it, but just I'll give you a peripheral knowledge of what K adjustment factor is. K adjustment factor is that, a lot of times we we see tenders which are asking for a specific efficiency in design condition, as well as it is asking for compliance with the AHRI condition in terms of meeting a particular COP. Now, what ASHRAE says through its table 6.8.1c, that a compressor cannot be operating efficiently both at design condition, which in India condition is much more harsher as compared to HRI condition. It cannot operate efficiently at a harsher design condition and at AHRI condition. Now, just to give a little bit of flexibility on that, what ASHRAE has done is introduced a table that if a chiller is meeting certain efficiency requirement for the site condition, you have a little bit of relaxation on HRI condition, and there is a sliding rule method by which there is an extrapolation of HRI efficiency of 6.3 and 6.1 can be done. And as long as that chiller is meeting that efficiency requirement, it is considered to be compliant of ASHRAE 90.1 standard or the efficiency requirement. I will not get into it. Anyone interested to know about this can go to ASHRAE website. There are tables that can be downloaded, and there are ready-made templates available over there which can be worked out and you can understand for your own. It is a highly complex sliding rule formula which is over here. So this is the formula which is devised by ASHRAE and is being used to actually extrapolate the efficiency requirement for centrifugal chiller. Important point over here is, with the advent of two-stage compression, this particular requirement in India of K adjustment factor, putting K adjustment factor into use, is getting reduced in India. That means that you don't generally now centrifugal chillers have become so efficient that it can probably deliver you 6.5 COP at AHRI condition and still deliver a very good efficiency at site condition, which could be a harsher condition. And it is only possible because centrifugal design has evolved over a period of time. It has the lift capabilities have been enhanced. Because of two-stage compression, there are a lot of changes that we are seeing over here in the efficiency, in the manner in which it handles the the unloading, the part load efficiency. So all these things have changed a lot from what it was 10 years back. This is my last slide, and I thought let me just present to you this. This is on the refrigerant. We know that refrigerant landscape is changing, and we are migrating from one refrigerant to other refrigerant, and there are certain requirements that is there when it comes to the new age refrigerant of centrifugal chiller also. I will try and cover the overall shift that is happening on refrigerant. Of course, it is far way off. It is like we are talking about 27 years from now. But in this particular slide, I'm trying to present the gist of it, how the refrigerant landscape is changing. It could be a little bit of an interest to us. So if you see the recent Kigali amendment that has happened on Montreal Protocol, so basically there are two Article 5 groups that are identified, Article 5 Group 1 and Article 5 Group 2. And India would typically fall into Article 5 Group 2 category. Here we are talking about freeze of refrigerant in 2028. That is, this is with respect to the HFC consumption, hydrofluorocarbon, okay? Step 1 is 10% reduction by 2032. Step 2 is 2037, 20% reduction. Step 3 is 30% reduction. And step 4 is in 2047, 85% reduction. The baseline is decided on the average of 2024, 2025, and 2026. That means that there is service trail remaining still beyond 2047. Now, we all know that ASHRAE Standard 34 talks about categorization of refrigerants. So there are three categories which were there earlier: A1 category to A3 category, which actually denoted the flammability, A1 being less flammable or not flammable, and A3 being extremely flammable. And there were in the B1 section, you have two categories, which is actually have three categories. You have B1, B2, B3, B1, B2, B3. This used to be earlier. Now it has changed. There is another category of A2L, and B2L have been introduced. So A2L stands for mild flammability. Now, surprisingly, all the new age refrigerant, which is the HFO type of refrigerant, hydrofluoroolefin type, they fall into the A2L category. That means they are basically mildly flammable refrigerant. You look at R32, you look at R1234YF or 1234ZE, they are all mildly flammable refrigerant. Now, fortunately for us, what refrigerant centrifugal uses is generally R1233ZD, and that is still in the A1 category. That means it doesn't propagate the flame. Of course, there are manufacturers available with different type of refrigerants like 514A and all, and we don't want to talk about that because they see overall toxicity is also an important factor, and some of the refrigerants fall into higher toxicity category like 1, 2, 3, and 4, 514A. But in terms of centrifugal, since this is our subject of discussion today, we are looking at transitioning from HFC, which is R134A, to R1233ZD. And that is something which is like 27 years off. I've already discussed about that. And in terms of different categories, this is how we are transitioning. So screw chiller on 12134A is transitioning to 1234ZE. Centrifugal chiller, as I mentioned, from 134A and 123, it is transitioning to 121. Sorry, this typo here. It is 1233ZD and R514A. VRF, of course, there's a lot of research going on from 410A. R32 is probably not a plausible solution because of the flammability, and I've already touched upon that. And unitary product is shifting from R22 and 410A. I mean, R22 is like almost gone now, and 410A, these are the two refrigerants which are prevalent. It is shifting from these refrigerants to R32 and R290. Challenges still remain. We still have somewhere a flammability issue to address, somewhere a cost issue to address, because some of the new age refrigerants are expensive as well. Are we completely geared up for servicing those refrigerants or the technologies with new age refrigerant? The answer is probably a no. So there's a lot of shift happening in the industry. People are getting reskilled, retrained. The practices are changing. But of course, we have a defined roadmap now, and we can look at transitioning from the new age from this refrigerant that we are currently using to new age refrigerant over a period of time. So that's all from my side. I have tried to cover as much mechanical component I could in this, and put together the slides in a way so that I can probably talk about different components, the working philosophy, fundamentals. So I would just request your feedback, and let's open this for Q&A. And in case you have any questions, I can take them.
Thank you, Dipankar. So we have got some questions. I'll go one by one as a moderator. So obviously
Sure.
there are a lot of points about the presentation, a lot of good points about the presentation, which you can obviously look at the chat box. And let me ask you the question. The first question had come from Mr. Soumitra Banerjee, who had asked, could you please explain the extent we can play with efficiency of the chiller by playing with tip speed and lift at full load? Yeah.
So just okay. So just wanted to ensure I got the question right. So I think the question is how you can improve the efficiency by changing the impeller diameter, or tip speed is, I mean, it's something like a direct function of impeller diameter.
Yeah.
So basically, so if you choose a lower diameter impeller, that means you will be able to generate lower lift. And as you are able to generate lower lift, your motor size will also come down. That means you will be consuming less power. But if you are designing the chiller for Calcutta, or let's say for Chennai, how can you generate lower lift? Because your chiller will be subjected to higher lift because the wet bulb temperature is higher there. So you have to select an impeller which kind of complements the lift requirement that is there in your location. So in one word, your answer is, if you select impeller with a lower diameter, your power consumption will be less, but it should also be able to generate your design lift. If you select the impeller dia higher, it will generate more lift, but your power consumption will also go up. So you need to select the impeller in a way so that it actually complements your lift requirement for a specific region.
Okay, so next question is, I believe, request to repeat the behavior of CF chiller, centrifugal chiller, during reduced internal load and reduced external load, WBT.
Sorry, come again. What is this?
I could not understand the question also. I'm just repeating what he has written. Request to repeat behavior of centrifugal chiller during reduced internal load and reduced external load.
Okay, so I'll just try and explain this. This is something which will probably give some idea. Okay, so this is how it is. So if you see the one on the top, this is, I'll just enable the light. If you see this graph, this is the constant condenser entering water, constant entering condenser water temperature graph. That means that from 100, 90, 80, 70, 60, this is part load happening, but then there's hardly any relief on the condenser water. So this is a constant condenser profile. This is the constant centrifugal chiller with ARI relief. So there is an ARI relief happening over here, and it is sliding. So if you see, this is the profile of the power consumption when there's an ARI relief happening. So there is a marginal gap between these two. Of course, you'll have improved efficiency for ARI relief that is happening on the condenser. Yeah, Somajit. Next question.
Yeah, next question is, could you please explain the extent we can play with efficiency of chiller? Achha, the same question. Sorry, I repeated the same question. Sorry. Next question is, what are the typical drawbacks or limitations of CF chiller? Drawbacks or limitations of CF chiller?
So, it's a very subjective question, and see, as such, there is Limitation wise, the limitation of centrifugal chiller is, I think the way I look at it is the unloading factor. Okay. So if your operation is something which is too much in part load condition and your centrifugal chiller is not equipped with a VFD, then centrifugal chiller will not work efficiently. Or other way, if I may put it, that if you're putting a centrifugal chiller and you have not done the load analysis correctly, and you are uh, probably making a centrifugal chiller operate in a very efficient way, either at a very high lift, despite of part load happening, then it is a very inefficient process. So you need to understand that you need to study the load, you need to study what is the temperature at condenser water ending temperature at which your centrifugal needs to operate for how many hours, and what is the tonnage. And depending on that, you have to decide that whether it makes sense for you to go for centrifugal chiller. Centrifugal chiller, another disadvantage is that it is not suitable for lower load. That means, let's say you have something like a 600-ton requirement for the whole building. You don't go for 250 into 3 or 200 into 3 kind of configuration, because centrifugal chillers are not available in those ranges. We have seen 400 and above or 450 and above centrifugal chillers comes into play, and a typical building size would be anything 2000, 2500, even it can start from 1500 ton also. So that is one limitation. For lower load, it is not a very efficient chiller, and this is generally avoided in case of lower load, and it is probably wise to go for screw chiller in that case.
Okay, there's a question related to that. You talked about disadvantage, then there's a question on the advantage also. I think you have shared the advantage in your entire presentation, if I'm not wrong. Okay, so
Yes.
Next question is, what is the NPLV? Before you answer,
Okay.
please share your email ID, personal email ID, whatever, so that people can connect with you. If it,
Yeah, sure. So I will just put it on the chat box, right?
Yeah, that would be great. And second.
Yeah, I have shared it.
Great. Now the next question is, what can this presentation be shared? Is it possible, or is it, I think,
Yeah, so there are a lot of materials, which is it is a heavy presentation. I cannot share the animations and all. Okay. But let me see what I can share, because it's not something which is open to it's open to public. So there are a lot of restricted material there. Some from my present talk. Yeah.
I understand. Okay, so let me go ahead. What is the NPLV? Next question.
NPLV is called non-standard part load value. Okay, and this is a very common term. If you go to AHRI website and download AHRI 590, it will be nicely explained there. So this is you have weighted average of 100, 75, 50, 25 percentage point load. So what you're talking about here is 1% of the time HRI says that it will operate at 100% load. It will operate at, I think, 42% of the time at 75% load, at 43% of the time at 50% load, and 5% of the time in 25% load. So that's how it is being done. It is being calculated, and weighted average is being taken, and a value is published depending on the chiller performance.
Okay, that's the next question, which is from Gunjan. What is the degree of superheat we consider in real design and operation of chiller? Two-stage and single-stage superheat change in design.
So generally, the superheat, to the best of my understanding, it should be in the range of 5 to 7 degrees. Okay, and this particular superheat is being which is slightly on a lower side for centrifugal chiller. For two-stage centrifugal chiller, it should be around 2 degrees Fahrenheit less as compared to the single stage chiller.
Okay, so the same participant, another question: how refrigerant change impact chiller design in terms of efficiency?
So refrigerant change, I think, yeah, of course. So we are talking about the new age refrigerant. That is probably R1233ZD is what people are interested in knowing. So R1233ZD, any manufacturer that is coming up with a centrifugal solution with R1233ZD, generally the efficiency level is very high because R1233ZD in itself is a very efficient refrigerant, and B, the compressor design is changing. So we'll see the new series that Carrier has launched, or for that matter, even some of the product offering by York recently that have happened, be it magnetic levitation or the normal centrifugal chiller. They are inherently very efficient products. So I think the efficiency jump in terms of the old refrigerant versus new refrigerant should be in the range of around 10 to 12%, which is substantial, which I think is substantial.
Okay, the next question is from Ronak Bhattacharya. What is the basic difference between low pressure technology and high pressure technology in centrifugal chiller?
Low pressure technology. I'm not sure what is the question, but so when you talk about low pressure technology is when centrifugal is generating lower lift, and when you're talking about high pressure technology is something when you're generating higher lift. So low pressure. So I think it is important that here I'd like to talk about the two-stage compression and single-stage compression. So two-stage compression actually, since the lift is being divided, it actually operates at a lower RPM. Okay, and of course it is being generated in a way that it is able to just overcome the condenser water pressure. So that is probably a kind of a low lift design, and when you design low lift, only when you have a situation where the low lift is able to suffice the requirement, the design requirement of that place. So let's say you design something in Bangalore, you'll be designing for low lift. You design something for in Calcutta, it will be for high lift. So that is how low pressure and high pressure can be defined.
Okay, now there is a mathematical with you. There's a question from Divyendu Sekhar: how the two centrifugal chiller operate? Suppose 100 ton selected with 500 ton into two numbers of centrifugal at 75%. How the play will operate? I don't understand the English.
Yeah, I am also not very sure on that.
Yeah, so
maybe you can mail me that question. I can take up
yeah, I think
separately.
that would be better. That would be better. So just a second. Many of the people asking for the PPT, I've told them sorry. And they are also looking for another webinar from you on screw chiller. So that's also a food for thought for you. So, there's a question from Harsh Bhanu. Sir, can you share your thoughts on the list of exhaustive factors that decide the mass of refrigerant required?
Exhaustive factors.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is it?
That decide the mass of refrigerant required.
Mass of refrigerant required.
Yeah.
I am not sure how to answer that question. Mass is refrigerant is basically the refrigerant that is. I mean, mass of refrigerant is something which is a function of, or rather, the capacity delivered by the chiller is a function of the mass of refrigerant. So more refrigerant relates to more capacity, less refrigerant, less capacity. That's how it is.
Yeah, I think.
Sir, in a two-stage compressor, this is Harsh, by the way, sir. Very thanks for the informative presentation. I meant to say that, if, for example, in a two-stage compression of a chiller, does that result into more mass for a similar sized single stage compression chiller?
So basically, the capacity of the refrigerant for, let's say, for a specific capacity of a chiller, the refrigerant required is something which is directly proportional with the tonnage. So higher the tonnage requirement or higher the tonnage being delivered, higher the refrigerant. Now that refrigerant capacity is something which is, it's something an inherent design philosophy of different manufacturers. And it can vary anywhere between 90% to 110% of the capacity delivered. So a typical example of that is for a 700-ton centrifugal chiller, the refrigerant that is required, full charge, could be anywhere between maybe 650 kg to maybe 800 kgs. It is purely inherent, it's something which is not, it's design, it's proprietary, and it's different from different manufacturer. So have I answered your question? I mean, what is the question? I mean,
Yes, sir. Thanks. There were other intricacies. I'll pick this up in a mail with that answers my question.
no problem.
Okay. So the next question from Arif Minaj: how can we calculate the gear ratio?
Gear ratio.
Yeah.
So gear ratio is not something which is to be calculated by any field person, and again something which is a proprietary thing to the manufacturer. So what you see in a centrifugal selection library is what you see is generally maybe multiple options of gear ratios, and depending on your experience, you pick the gear ratio that you feel that can deliver your required lift for your design capacity, and that's how we select. I mean, of course, you can find the details in your design engineering manual or maybe in your operation and maintenance manual. But this is from a layman's perspective, it's just something which is off the shelf. Since it's a mix and match chiller, you pick up a particular condenser, a cooler, a compressor, an impeller, a particular gear ratio which is in your library, and then
Right. Okay. So continuing with the questions, because we just have about 20 minutes to finish. So there's a question from Vijay Singh. The question is related to mostly in the service part, but still I asked you how to ensure that the refrigerant amount, the quantity is accurate after few years of working. I mean, in short, how to prevent leakages. There are very minute leakages happen in refrigerant. How to prevent that?
Actually, sir, I just want to ask that after a few years working, functioning, there happen some leakages. So how do you ensure that it is working on the right amount of refrigerant? Because the performance also gets affected by the amount of refrigerant.
yeah. So basically, there's a possibility of leakage in both open type centrifugal and hermetic type centrifugal. There are enough joints, enough gasket through which refrigerant can leak, and it is important that you do a check on the refrigerant quantity, and maybe you do a super rating check. There are different checks available. I would not be able to throw much light upon the service aspect of it. I'm sure if anybody is present on this forum from service side, maybe can throw some light on this. But there are different mechanisms by which you can check whether the refrigerant charge is sufficient. It is able to generate enough superheat, or by means of checking the subcooling, you can actually decide whether the refrigerant quantity is correct and whether you need to top up or the current situation is fine.
Yeah, I think it is a question.
Thank you, sir. I will.
This is a question related to service.
I will connect by email.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So next question is from Miss, I don't know, Neha Silke. Are centrifugal chiller not recommended for negative temperature brine application because of its limited lift? Is a question, huh?
So personally, I have never used centrifugal chiller for brine application, but I know there are manufacturers who offer for ice application also. And I don't see any reason why you can't trust them, because if they're offering, if stalwarts are companies like in JCI and York and Carrier, they're offering, I'm sure that it's a robust technology. Personally, I have very less exposure on the negative temperature, because in India you hardly come across these kind of requirements. But I
Right.
think it can be used. I mean, yeah.
Okay, there's one more question regarding hot gas valve. When it will work and it's designed for single stage and double stage. Whenever, what would the design be, and when it will work for hot gas valve for single stage and double stage compressor?
I would not be knowing that. I have to find out.
No issues.
Maybe you can put the question. Maybe I can get a technical person to answer that. My engineering person.
Yeah. So next question from Mr. Pralay Paul. What should be the cause of low side surge?
Yeah, the low side surge, low load surge, I think probably he meant, right?
Yeah, I believe that. Yeah.
So low load surge is basically, which is also called an incipient surge. I touched upon that. In that, when that, you saw the impeller and you see the contours there, there are different creases and curves into the centrifugal chiller and given a particular shape, so that you're able to trap the refrigerant and in the impeller, and when it is rotating, it is able to impart the same velocity on the refrigerant. When these cavities are not getting filled with enough refrigerant, then the problem is it does not generate enough lift for the refrigerant to flow into the condenser. It has to maintain a certain density. So, when the refrigerant flow is less, the density of the refrigerant which is getting trapped into the impeller is also less, because of which it is not able to generate the lift, and this is where the low load surge happens.
Okay. There's one question which I do not understand. What multi-compressor can be used? So, what multi-compressor can be used? Is it? I don't know.
Yeah, so multi-compressor we have seen in series counterflow being deployed for a centrifugal chiller. It can be in the same frame. It can be deployed differently also. Now, series counterflow and district cooling design is a different subject in itself, and
Yeah.
I think probably we'll look at covering that in some other forum.
Correct. What is next question? What is the use of PLC controller? I think they missed out the
So
presentation.
PLC is basically a microprocessor controller which controls all the components that I spoke about. So it basically controls the load at which the chiller is operating. It controls the oil pump. It controls the inlet guide vane. It controls the heater. It controls the motor cooling. It senses and monitors all the temperatures, and maybe shut off the. It will probably shut off the chiller if some of the parameters are not right. Let's the winding temperature is not right. The superheater is not right. The lift is something which also it monitors. So the moment it sees that the operating point is getting close to the surge line, it will stop the compressor. It will stop. It will probably. As I said, that there's a hot gas bypass mechanism, or there's a VFD mechanism by which it can ramp up the compressor speed. It can do a chill water reset. It can also open the hot gas bypass. So PLC is, or the microprocessor control is very, very important electronic component that is part of centrifugal chiller, because it is basically, it monitors the performance of the operation of the centrifugal chiller, and takes preventive measures as and when required.
Right. Last two questions, Dipankar, before we wind up. First question is: Does lower gear ratio increases the lift in conventional centrifugal? I think you have answered that. And how is the lift managed in magnetic bearing compressor? Can it be only done with VFD? I'm sorry, I got too many questions together at one shot.
Yes.
Just repeat it. Should
No,
I
that's
repeat the
okay.
question? Yeah, okay.
No, I think I've got the question. You're talking about a magnetic levitation chiller. Okay, so magnetic levitation is necessarily a centrifugal technology, wherein the shaft, the impellers are mounted, is being levitated, magnetically levitated. So it is, in case of a conventional centrifugal chiller, it is resting on a bearing. In case of a magnetic levitation chiller, the bearing is levitated and it is rotating in the air. So the biggest advantage is that since there's no friction that is happening, you can rotate it at a much higher RPM. Let's say 35,000 RPM. So it is able to generate more lift. Because it is able to generate more lift, the compressor can become much more compact. And because there is no friction that is happening, it also delivers fantastic efficiency.
Right. So now we come into the last question. Excuse me. We're gonna problem sum. I believe this question is, you can also go to a chat box, it's quite a long one. The 1000 TR selected with 500 TR into 2 number centrifugal at 75% load. Will both the chiller will operate at 75% part load, or how will the chiller will operate? So both chillers operate at 75%? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I can see the question as you speak. It is probably the last question.
Yeah.
So what is being asked, if it is operating at 75%, so the building load I'm assuming is 1000 ton, and the design is that 500 into 2 has been installed, centrifugal chiller has been installed. So if building load comes down to, let's say, 75%, then because it is, both the chillers are taking the same input of chill water return, so both the chillers will unload 75% each. That's how it happens. If it is in a common header, both the chillers will unload equally. And for any unloading or any the load going up, the chiller would unload and upload simultaneously in the same capacities. To the extent there is a line balancing done, and then the chill water line balancing is perfect. So that's how generally chillers operate.
Yeah, and the same person has asked a final question in that. What logic governed to unload, and when we couple two centrifugal, I think we have answered that. Okay. So
Yeah.
thank you, Deepankar. I think we had a very, very informative. There are a lot of kudos such as come across in the chat box. You may have missed it, and people have really loved it. And let me congratulate you, because with your presentation, we had the highest number of participants ever in Kolkata chapter webinar. So we created history today.
Oh, that's great to know that. Good, Somajit, thank you so much for doing this, and it's an honor. Thanks for inviting me.
So we are not going to leave you. We are not going to leave you. We want to have one more presentation in a later time. Maybe I've already given you food for thought. So thank you all.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.